seems like every time you check the news, there's a new data breach or privacy scandal. This case involves a company called Choice DNA. They specialize in something called facial DNA analysis. It sounds incredibly futuristic, but it is apparently a real thing. They help people find lost relatives, explore their ancestry, that sort of thing. They left a folder on their website completely unsecured, and I'm not talking about, weak passwords here. I mean wide open for anyone to access.
That's not great. But what kind of information are we talking about here?
So we're talking biometric images, names, phone numbers, email addresses, the works. They even had notes on why people were seeking facial DNA analysis in the first place.
Oh, wow. Talk about adding insult to injury. But 8,000 records, while, not insignificant, it doesn't feel like a massive breach compared to some of the headlines we see. So what makes this Choice DNA situation particularly concerning?
Well, it's not just about the number of records, it's about the nature of the information itself. We're talking about biometric data, which is essentially tied to your physical identity. You can change your password, but you can't exactly change your face. Once this kind of data is out there, it's out there for good.
And this facial DNA analysis thing, it's not just about, predicting what your kids might look like, right? What are the implications of this information being compromised?
You're right. It goes beyond just predicting appearances. It's used in law enforcement, for example, to identify potential suspects, track down missing persons. Now imagine that same technology being used with stolen data to create deepfakes. Incredibly realistic but fake videos or images of you.
It's a chilling thought.
And it brings us to our next story, which involves a company many people consider a champion of user privacy, Mozilla.
Mozilla. The folks behind Firefox, the browser that's supposed to be all about protecting our privacy, what did they do?
Well, they're facing a GDPR complaint for enabling something called privacy-preserving attribution, or PPA for short, by default in Firefox. Essentially, it's a way for advertisers to track your browsing habits without directly collecting your personal data.
Privacy-preserving attribution. That sounds like an oxymoron to me. Is Mozilla turning to the dark side, selling our data to the highest bidder?
It's more nuanced than that. They argue that PPA is a way to balance user privacy with the need for websites to fund themselves through advertising. But critics are concerned because it was enabled by default, meaning users were automatically opted in without their knowledge or consent.
It does seem a little sneaky. So how does this PPA thing actually work? Are they spying on everything we do online?
It's not quite spying, but more like aggregated tracking. So imagine, instead of every website you visit collecting data about you individually, Firefox itself collects this information on your behalf and sends it to advertisers in a way that supposedly doesn't directly identify you.
So it's like they're putting all the data in a blender and handing advertisers a smoothie. They get the general flavor, but not the individual ingredients.
That's a great analogy. And that's Mozilla's key selling point with PPA. They claim it gives advertisers the information they need without compromising your, individual privacy.
But isn't that what Google tried to do with their privacy sandbox? And that got a lot of pushback too, right?
You are right to be reminded of that. Both PPA and Privacy Sandbox aim to make the internet less reliant on those pesky, third-party cookies while still allowing for targeted advertising. But the approaches are different, and it raises the question of who we trust more with our data, Google or Mozilla.
It's like picking your poison, isn't it?
Yeah. Some people might be okay with this level of tracking if it means they see more relevant ads and websites can continue offering, free content. Others are uncomfortable with any form of tracking, regardless of how anonymous it claims to be.
It all boils down to trust, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And speaking of trust, or maybe the lack thereof, this next story is, it's a wild ride.
The UK train station hack, a classic example of how cybersecurity vulnerabilities can be exploited for purposes beyond just data theft.
Because in this case, it wasn't about stealing information. It was about, spreading fear and chaos.
Just imagine you're at a busy train station trying to connect to the Wi-Fi, and instead of the usual login page, you're met with messages about, terrorist incidents and other, disturbing content.
And to make it even creepier, they added a line saying, "We love you, Europe." What's that all about? Are they trying to be friendly? It's just so strange.
Right, that's the thing. The intent is incredibly murky, and that ambiguity can be just as unnerving as a more straightforward attack. Are they trying to incite panic, spread misinformation, or simply sow discord? It's hard to say for sure.
And the fact that they were able to target multiple stations, including major hubs like London, Euston. I mean, it's not like this was some small-time operation. How did they even pull this off? Is public Wi-Fi really that easy to hack?
You'd be surprised how vulnerable many public Wi-Fi networks are. Without getting too technical, there are various ways to exploit weaknesses from, guessing passwords to taking advantage of outdated software.
So it doesn't necessarily require some elite hacker with years of experience in a secret layer.
Not necessarily. While it's impossible to say for sure without more information, this particular attack could have been carried out by individuals with, moderate technical skill.
Which makes it all the more concerning, right?
Exactly. It lowers the barrier to entry for this kind of, malicious activity.
It's a scary thought. And what's even more unsettling is that the article mentioned something called a night sleeper style attack. Is that like a new cyber weapon we need to be worried about?
Don't worry, it's not a new type of malware or anything like that. The term night sleeper actually comes from a fictional TV show where a group of hackers target transportation systems to cause widespread chaos.
Okay, so why bring it up? Is this real-life hack ripped straight from the TV screen?
Not exactly, but the comparison is telling. It highlights how something that might seem like the plot of, fictional thriller can have real-world parallels. While the train station hack might not be as elaborate as a Hollywood production, it underscores the very real vulnerabilities of our critical infrastructure.
So it's a wake-up call, reminding us that even in the 21st century, our, digital networks are susceptible to attacks that can, disrupt our daily lives and sow discord. And that even if we brush aside the fear-mongering aspects of this particular incident, it raises bigger questions about who has access to these systems and what measures are in place to protect them.
Precisely. And it's not just about preventing these attacks from happening, although that's obviously crucial, but also about building resilience so that even if someone manages to breach security, the impact is minimized.
Because even if they fix the Wi-Fi and, beef up security, the damage is done, right?
Exactly. It erodes trust, not just in technology itself, but in the systems and institutions we rely on every day. And that erosion of trust can have, far-reaching consequences.
It's interesting how this, seemingly random act of digital vandalism connects back to the themes we were discussing earlier, trust, control, and the, trade-offs between convenience and security. It's like every story we've looked at today is another piece of the same puzzle.
Indeed. And this next story involves a hacker who allegedly made millions from insider trading by, get this, compromising executive email accounts. It involves an individual from the UK named Robert Westbrook, who's accused of targeting executives at various companies, gaining access to their Microsoft 365 accounts, and using that information for insider trading.
This is calculated, financially motivated cybercrime.
Precisely. And what's fascinating about this case is how it highlights the evolving nature of cyber threats. We often think of hackers as targeting large organizations to steal data en masse. But this case shows how individuals can also be targeted for the information they have access to.
And information, as they say, is power, especially in the world of finance, where a single, well-placed tip can mean the difference between a fortune and bankruptcy. But how did this Westbrook character even manage to pull this off? Was it some, incredibly sophisticated hack?
You might be surprised to learn that it often doesn't take a technological marvel to, breach security. While the specifics haven't been released, it's quite possible he used relatively low-tech methods, like phishing emails or exploited weak or reused passwords.
So it all comes back to basic cyber hygiene.
Absolutely. Strong, unique passwords and a healthy dose of skepticism when opening emails from, unknown senders can go a long way in protecting yourself from these kinds of attacks.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. You don't need to be a cybersecurity expert to take basic steps to protect yourself online.
Exactly. And this brings us to our final story. A while back, Epic Games pulled Fortnite from the Google Play Store because they didn't want to pay Google's cut of the profits.
Right. I remember that whole saga. They wanted users to download the game directly from their website instead.
Exactly. And that's where Samsung enters the picture. Samsung has a feature on their devices called Auto Blocker, which is designed to prevent users from installing apps from, unauthorized sources.
Which in theory is a good thing, right? Protecting users from, potentially harmful apps.
Absolutely. The intention behind Auto Blocker is sound. However, Epic Games argues that, in this case, it's being applied too broadly and creates an unnecessary barrier for users who want to download Fortnite.
So they're basically saying that Samsung is making it intentionally difficult for users to download Fortnite because they're not getting a cut of the profits.
That's the gist of their argument, and it highlights the tension between tech giants like Samsung and Google, who want to control the app ecosystem and take a cut of every transaction, and app developers like Epic Games, who are looking for ways to bypass those gatekeepers and have a more direct relationship with their users.
It's a classic power struggle, and it's fascinating to see how it's playing out in the legal arena. A huge thank you to our expert for sharing their insights and helping us navigate this increasingly complex digital world.
My pleasure, as always.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe out there